I'm Jeff Pospisil, the 10-Minute Treasurer, with practical advice for improving your church's financial future. In this video, I'm going to look at the duties of the trustees, and one of those duties is making sure that your church is properly insured. You know, a lot of times churches kind of go on cruise control in this area. Once they get it set up, they don't think about it for years and years and years. But really, you should get on a regular cycle. I kind of like every 5 years, taking a close look at your policy. And a lot of times your insurance agent will like that too. They'll review your policy with you, make some recommendations, and help you think through it. So I'm going to look at the most common insurance needs of a church in this video. So hopefully this helps. First of all, one of the mistakes that churches do is they never bid out their insurance. They never ask for proposals. They go with the same person always, and then you really have no idea if you're getting good service or not, or what the differences are, or if you're paying too much or not. So it is a good idea to every now and then bid it out. I mean, maybe it's every 5 years or 10 years or whatever it is, but every now and then do bid it out. It'll drive your costs down usually, and it's a great way for also reviewing what your needs are as a church. So when you bid out your insurance, you're going to find out that there are a whole lot of options. You know, you got your State Farm and your Farmers Insurance and Church Mutual and every other one. But one of our tendencies is to go with the person that's maybe it's the person in the pew, but also the person that we're used to insuring our own home with, or maybe our own business with. But here's the word of caution: do they have experience working with churches, insuring churches? Do their agents have that experience? Because churches have different risks than a lot of other places. And that's why I strongly encourage you to look at one of those ones like Guide One, Brotherhood Mutual, or Church Mutual that specializes in churches. The Dakotas Conference currently is with Brotherhood Mutual. They are awesome. We've worked with Church Mutual in the past. They are awesome. Guide One, I respect them as well. But those are the ones, even if you don't choose them, at least talk to them, because they will bring up these specific issues that churches face. The first category of insurance we're going to look at is property insurance. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because most of us have experience with property insurance through owning a home. But we're going to look at this. And by the way, the church in the background is our church in Alexandria, South Dakota. So just for your general trivia knowledge. One of the things to think about is the replacement cost versus market value. So replacement cost means if the church burns down, do we want the money to actually build it or replace it, or do we just want the value of that church? Which is going to be considerably less and not enough to actually replace the building. And there's probably a lot of factors to think about. And a lot of times people just like the cost savings, and they think, well, if it burns down, we'll never rebuild it. You know, they're a little bit pessimistic. But really, if your town has a school, it needs a church. If your town is 500 or more, or it's growing, it needs a church. There's just so much potential there that it really does need a church, a strong church. That's not to say that churches that are towns that are smaller or don't have a school or don't need a church, but you probably need to go through a different discernment process in that, and visiting with your district superintendent as well would be helpful. The other thing to think about is your deductible. I encourage churches to save up for major repairs, major maintenance, major replacement costs. So look at those reserve balances. If you have a healthy reserve balance, of $25,000, $50,000, you can probably deal with a much higher deductible because you're basically self-insuring, and that could save quite a bit on your premiums. Also think about your claims history, as well as, are you proactive or reactive on safety? And a lot of times those two will correlate, but I mean, if you have a lot of claims and you're careless, that'll also affect your premiums, but maybe you do need a smaller deductible because you really need it. And you also need to work on your safety issues as well. But those are the things to think about with property insurance. The next category we're going to look at is workers' comp insurance. And by the way, the staff in the background is from our Fusion Church at Mitchell, South Dakota. There's some confusion about workers' comp and whether a church really needs it or not. What if you only have a pastor? Do you need it or not? And here's my understanding is that basically you are either self-insured or you're buying insurance. I know that's the way it is in South Dakota. I think it's that way in North Dakota, but I'm not totally for sure. I kind of get that one confused a little bit. But no matter what, you are responsible for the liability. So if your pastor gets hurt playing dodgeball with the youth, you are responsible for that. Um, One way or the other, whether you buy insurance or you're self-insured. So I encourage you to just get insurance. It's usually not that expensive for a pastor. Other thing is to look at those state differences. For example, North Dakota, you can only buy workers' comp insurance from workforce safety or whatever they call it nowadays, but it's the government. You can only buy it from the government. South Dakota, you can buy it from any company. But there are different state differences. You can call your Department of Labor and or look them up online and see those differences. And then the last thing to pay attention to is that your employees are properly classified. Especially like your custodial employees, those are the ones that they have the highest risk. So you need to make sure they are classified as custodial employees. So that way, if they do get injured on the job, we can properly care for them. So the next category is liability insurance. And this is an important one because this one kicks in if somebody is harmed because of your church or your church's operations. It's a way of protecting the church's financial resources as well as making those that are harmed whole. So it really helps both sides there. The first one is commercial general. So that's if somebody is hurt on your property, like they slip and fall in the parking lot, or something else happens that their property or their person is damaged on your church premises. Pastoral counseling. A lot of our pastors do some kind of counseling. It's good to have some coverage there in case something goes wrong. Sexual misconduct. I think that's a very important one, especially if you have children and youth. It's just a good idea because as much as I wish it would never, ever, ever happen, and a lot of us make a lot of steps to prevent it from ever being even a possibility, but it can happen, and this would help protect both ways. Again, it would help do something to help make the victim whole, and it would also protect the church from being bankrupted as well. Hired and non-owned auto. That's a good one too that you need as well because you'll either have volunteers driving or you're going to have your pastor going out on work-related business. So they're going to be visiting people. They're going to be going to the hospital. And what happens if something bad happens during then? How do we cover that? Cybersecurity is getting to be a bigger one as we're going more online and more electronic donations and all that kind of stuff, more electronic records, period. We need something that protects in case something goes bad there as well. Then I got 2 pages of these other coverages, and they're not less important, but they just don't fit neatly like the other ones do. So the first one is directors and officers. This protects your leadership. If somebody goes and sues the church and names the leadership, this is what protects them if they're sued because of a decision they make. Employment practices kind of fits under here as well. That's if a lot of times churches get sloppy in their hiring and firing and all their HR side. So even if you do things right, you still might end up getting sued because somebody thinks they were fired incorrectly. So that's not a bad one to do, but I would think that's a really good one to have if you have more than just the pastor as an employee. Crime and employee dishonesty. So this is the one where you're lax on the financial policies. You're probably inviting somebody to steal or at least giving them every opportunity. But this is basically how you bond your treasurer. So is to have this kind of coverage. Auto coverage. So if your church owns a vehicle, this happens to be one of our great ministries in Sioux Falls, the Night Watch. It's a feeding ministry, but so if you own a vehicle, you should make sure it's properly insured as well. And then the umbrella is kind of the catch-all. If anything goes over and above, the umbrella somehow catches it. I really don't understand that one all the way. So that's the best explanation I have for you. And now is your other coverages. These are really on a case-by-case basis and are not going to be needed by every church. One of them is like religious freedom. So if you have a tendency to push against the government, maybe it's with these COVID restrictions, you're pushing against that, or maybe it's your right to speak, or you're pushing some justice issues, whatever it is. If you're pushing on the government and you feel this need that you might need this, I would encourage you to get it. They'll help fight those legal battles. The other one is if you send people on mission trips, you probably need some kind of coverage when you go on those mission trips. So talk to your insurance provider, or maybe it's the company that's helping you within the mission trip. A lot of times they'll provide some kind of coverage, but think through that. And then the last one is event coverage. This happens to be one of my own church's event at Mitchell Wesleyan Church, where they bring in a lot of people from the community. There's bounce houses, there's barbecue, there's there's a lot of liability issues, and just making sure that you would talk to your insurance agent and say, hey, we're going to have this big community event, and what do we need to make sure we're covered in case something goes bad? So, and they'll hook you up with that. All right, hopefully that helped. Again, this is a ministry of the finance office of the Dakotas United Methodist Church, as well as the Dakotas United Methodist Foundation. So, and you can always find more of our stuff online at dakotasumc.org. All right, God bless you, and talk to you next time.